Welcome back to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. I'm excited for you guys to be able to sit down with myself and Ralph Jodice and have a discussion about being a grandpa. Now, just a little bit of a history for you guys. Ralph is a retired lieutenant general living in Pennsylvania, and he served his career in the U.S. Air Force. And so lieutenant general, for those that don't know, is 3 stars. And so quite an accomplishment and a rare group of individuals that he's been able to join with his achievements. Now, for the real detailed bio for Ralph, I've put the link to his Air Force biography in the show notes. So you can go to the website and then look at the show notes for this episode and then click on that link. You guys are in for a treat because we get to sit down and we talk about all the different aspects that Ralph enjoys with being a grandfather. And sometimes I think we don't picture generals and congressmen and senators and people, I don't know, that with high rank inside and outside the military and government still being grandpas and still wanting to be able to get down on the ground and play Legos with grandsons and have tea and play Barbies with granddaughters. But you know, at the end of the day, we're all a bunch of cool grandpas that are just trying to do the best we can for our grandkids. So pull up a chair, lace up those shoes if you're going for a walk, get ready to enjoy us on a fun conversation. Hello, and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host, Greg Payne, coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Thank you, Ralph, for being on the Cool Grandpa Podcast. I really do appreciate taking some time out of your busy schedule and your day for you to sit down and talk with me about your experience with being a grandfather.
Well, thanks, Greg. It's my honor and pleasure to be with you here this evening as we're recording this. And I'm really glad that you reached out and through the connection through my son, Brian, to be able to have this opportunity to talk to you about being a granddad.
Oh, I appreciate it. I had such a blast being on Brian's podcast, Pick Up the Six. And you guys are the second father-son combination that I've been able to interview on the podcast. So this is exciting for me. Great.
Well, I know Brian has a very deep connection to his grandfathers. And I'm pretty confident he spoke with you about that. And so I'm hoping I have that same connection with our grandchildren, including his daughters.
I always like to ask other grandfathers what your reaction was when you found out that you were going to be a grandfather. You know, take us back a little bit to what were your circumstances and what were your initial thoughts when, you know, they came up and said, "Hey, Dad, guess what? You're going to be a grandfather."
Yeah. So our oldest granddaughter, who is Ellie, who is Brian's daughter, and he has 2 daughters. She was born in October of 2011. So when we found out, which would have been in early 2011, they had been married, more than a few years, 4 or 5 years or something along that line. And I probably should know the date exactly, but my wife's got that date. Okay.
Right.
I actually think, I'm pretty sure it was 2007. And so they've been married and they had decided to change career paths so that they could start a family. And so we kind of knew it was in the works. So it wasn't a complete surprise when I found out that I was going to be a grandfather, and my wife was going to be a grandmother. In our family, she's known as Nonna, the Italian word for grandmother. And it was, of course, we were pleasantly pleased. We felt very blessed, not completely shocked and blown out of the water. You know, the timing seemed about right. Brian and his wife, Liz, had been married, like I said, for 4 or so years. They'd been together for a few years before that. So it just sort of felt right. But then you start thinking about, well, I'm going to be a grandfather. And oh, by the way, when we found out, we were living in Izmir, Turkey. I was what eventually became my last assignment in the United States Air Force. and I retired from the United States Air Force in the middle of 13. So now we're separated by, almost half a planet, thousands of miles and thousands of miles from Brian and Liz, who at the time were living in the Washington, D.C. area in Silver Spring, basically in Silver Spring, Maryland, just on the north side of Washington, D.C.
Okay. Yeah, I know that area well. I grew up in Annandale. Just off 95 in the Beltway.
In that area. And I've had a few Pentagon assignments. So Judy and I and the family have had opportunities to live in places like Springfield and then even on Andrews Air Force Base. So yeah, we know the area pretty well.
Right. Now, how long were you still in Turkey when Ellie was born and a few months old? And how long were you out there before you got a chance to come back and see her in the? Yeah.
So this is a little bit of a story. And she winds up being born on October the 22nd of 2011. And she's born about 5 weeks premature because Liz was having a little bit of difficulties, not terrible, but she was having a little bit of difficulties. Ellie was doing great. We didn't know it was going to be Ellie. We didn't know it was going to be a girl, which is another whole story for our family. And we can go down that road. Convinced it was going to be a boy. And she's having a little bit of difficulties, but in that time period leading up to that, so at the end of March, my position at the time in Izmir, Turkey, I was the commander of a NATO air headquarters, known as Allied Air Command for Izmir, which basically I was the air component commander for the southern region of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization Alliance. And at the end of March of 2011, NATO had started an operation to protect civilians with Libya. I don't know if you remember any of that at all, called Operation Unified Protect, underneath the United Nations Security Council resolutions and that kind of thing. Well, I was then designated as the air component commander for that operation. So I am completely engaged and engrossed in leading our air operations for this. And so as time is going on, and as we get into the summer, and a little bit of this difficulty that Liz was having becomes a little bit more evident. Of course, my wife is keeping very close contact and things. And so somewhere, I want to say probably in early-ish October, my wife comes back to the States to be able to be around, to be able to help out. And Liz's mom lives in Philadelphia. So what winds up happening then is the doctors decide this baby is of significant enough size, about 5 pounds. The baby will do just fine. And they decide that they're going to do a C-section. And of course, I'm getting this via email now, updates from my wife, who's now in the States, on my then BlackBerry. We didn't have an iPhone, right? 2011. And a very significant event happens 2 days in regards to this operation, 2 days before Ellie winds up being born. That's how all that leads on up. And of course, I'm trying to stay in as close contact as I can, but I'm being pulled in multiple different directions. I'm struggling with the priorities that I had tried to set in my life, which I didn't come up with, which I had heard another Air Force officer talk about this when I was a captain, who said the priorities in his life had been his faith, his family, and his job, and in that order. But in the life of being in the military, they're going to get tugged in different directions, and at times the job's going to come first, and you got to figure out how to put and it's going to get out of whack. Right. And I come up with this expression: you got to figure out how to put it back in whack, right? How to get it back in priority. That was a struggle for me. And then, of course, we wound up having Ellie being born, not knowing, and they didn't want to know what the sex was going to be. And like I said, that's another part of this story. So, and when I find out, because of the significant event that had happened 2 days prior to her being born, it was sort of just this amazing relief. One, that everything was okay. Liz was okay. She was okay. Both Grandma, Grammy, and Nonna are great. Brian's great. Everything's good. I can now see that this operation is going to wind down very quickly and it winds up finishing on the 31st of October. But I'm not sure when I'm going to get to be able to go home, to come back to the U.S., to be able to see her.
That had to have been extremely tough. And it's something that is important for us to remember too about fathers and grandfathers in military service, or if you're just happen to be away, whether it's business or whatever, is sometimes being able to have to compartmentalize and shift those things around, right? I think too, it brings to mind that we also need to have a little bit of grace for those dads and granddads that may be going through something like this.
And it's not just the military. I mean, you look at our State Department people that are in sometimes more austere places than some of our military folks. Not all the time, but in some pretty austere locations that are far from home. And so you're right, that there is dads and granddads that are out there, potential grandparents that, like me, are away when that birth occurs, and you're not necessarily right there. Of course, today, as time has continued on, the ability to connect in multiple ways, shapes, and form through the interweb and all those other means and methods, right, makes that a little bit easier, but you still might not have that opportunity to be there actually in person.
We get the benefit of all this technology, like you're saying. It's possible to jump on a Skype, or even back then, even a phone call. Where if we think about like our grandfather's time in World War II era, even before that, it might be a telegram that's a few weeks late, and you're dealing with the not knowing, and you're in your head, and you're, so right. It makes me appreciate sometimes how some of these people that have come before us have been able to deal with some of that anxiety. Sometimes, most of the time, it turns out positive. It's just one of those, like, you don't know until you know.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, where we are today, we expect things instantaneously, right? And of course, like you said, our grandfathers, when they were going to find out that they were going to become grandfathers, you didn't have that expectation to know immediately. And so, but we were very blessed that all that was able to happen in a timely fashion. And then to finish that part of the story, because the operation ended when it did on the 31st of October, Judy came, well, she might not have. I don't remember whether she came back to Turkey or not, but I was able to go back to the U.S. for Thanksgiving. And that was the first time that I got to be able to hold Ellie, who is now just over a month, 5 weeks old, basically. Still a little peanut,
Sure.
Having been born at 5 weeks prior, but just doing absolutely fantastic.
Now, how many? We've got 6 grandkids total, right?
That's correct. Yes, 6.
Ellie being the oldest at she's 10.
She's going to be 10 this October. She'll be 10 this October.
Okay, and then we run down how are those ages? We're 10.
So she is 10, and then and of course with our oldest son Brian, we have 3 sons: Brian, Ralph, and Adam, in that order. And then number 2 is Cohen, who will be 7 this summer, and he's with our youngest son Adam, and they're currently in Montgomery, Alabama, where he and his wife are attending an Air Force course. They both are in the U.S. Space Force now.
Okay.
And then number 3 is Ellie's sister, Cece, or Cecilia, who will be 6 this October. And she and Ellie share the same birthday. And Cece was born naturally.
How does that?
Yeah, how does that happen?
Right.
Cece, Ellie's 5 weeks premature, C-section, gonna do this today, done.
Right.
They decide it's time for number 2, 4 years, approximately 4 years later. Cece, Liz is due, and her due date was, I want to say it was probably maybe 4 or 5 days later. And sure enough, Cece winds up being born on the same day, October 22nd, as Ellie 4 years later.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then next is Adeline, who just turned 5 in April. And again, she's with our youngest son, Adam, and his wife, Laurel. And then after that is our middle son, Ralph, who's out in Seattle. And he has Remy, who was 4 in March. And then number 6 in line is Jameson, who just turned 2 in March. And again, he's with Adam and Laurel. So there's 2 girls with Brian and Liz, 1 girl with Ralph and Christina, and then 2 boys with a girl sandwiched in between with Adam and Laurel. And then we have, I didn't say this in the information when we talked before, but then we have another family we're very close with, Scott and Jess. And Scott is about as close to being a foster son without really being a foster son. Same age as Brian. And they have 2 boys, Jackson and Peyton. Scott is a recruiter full-time in the Air Force Reserves. And they live in Greer, South Carolina, which is by Greenville, Spartanburg. And Jackson just turned 5, and Peyton is 1 and change, 1 in a couple months.
Okay.
So 6 by blood, and then 2, and they call us Granddad and Nonna, and we kind of treat each other as, as family and such.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome when you get that extended grandfather credit with little kids and all that. How has it been relationship-wise with the grandchildren? Because you're in North Carolina now, right?
We're in Pennsylvania, South Central Pennsylvania,
okay.
Hanover, Pennsylvania, yeah.
And then I know Brian's in North Carolina. And
right.
Then
Ralph's in Seattle.
Okay.
And Adam and Laurel, like I said, they're in Alabama. They're actually going to be moving up to Northern Virginia here to Burke this summer in June as they get assignment in the Pentagon. But so originally we wound up here in South Central Pennsylvania it was an hour and a half drive from where Brian and Liz, and at that time Ellie, and then eventually Cece would live in Silver Spring, Maryland. It put us close enough to them. I was very blessed and fortunate. I didn't need to chase a job when I retired. And so this put us an hour and a half drive from them, close enough, but not being in the DC area for all those obvious reasons, right? Right. We couldn't live near all of them. And so we decided to come here to South Central Pennsylvania. So at first, being close to them, we were able to see them, and Ralph and Christina were in Seattle. Adam and Laurel initially were in Colorado Springs, and then they were out in California with being assigned in the Air Force. So, but then Brian and Liz, now I guess it's approaching 4 years ago, Brian got a new job and moved to North Carolina. I'm like, we were originally going to live in North Carolina. Why didn't you make that decision? But anyway, that's okay. It's not a problem. But we're like, we're not moving. we're good.
Well, my 2 boys are in northwestern Virginia, out by where 81 and 66 come together.
Yeah.
We sometimes think about moving up there, but then the kids whisper every so often about how they may be moving. It's one of those things where we're weighing, if we move up there and the kids turn around and move, then we better like that area that we end up in.
Yeah. So, back to your question. So we've had to have these longer distance relationships. And then when we do have the opportunity to be together, whether it be for 4 or 5 days or whether it be a week, or Ralph and Christina and Remy were actually here for 3 weeks back in February time period as they were having some work done on their house and they couldn't work from home with the construction noise going on. Or we also, my brother and I co-own a house in North Carolina. That was our parents' retirement home that isn't too far from the beach. Or meeting there and things to then have those moments together where it's concentrated for a week or 2 weeks or 10 days, as opposed to living 10 or 15 minutes away where you can see them sometimes daily. I've got one of my good friends, one of our sets of our good friends here, who sees their grandson every day. They have him pretty much every day for a few hours with mom and dad working. And so that has made that part a little bit harder, but then having that time together, you're just trying to jam pack as much as you can, but in a proper way inside that time period, whether it's a week, whether it's a week and a half, whether it's 4 days, whether it's like I said, 3 weeks here recently.
Now, that's an interesting point, though, because it is focused kind of intense time with the family. Do you guys do any preparation ahead of time as far as, hey, there's an activity going on, I want to be able to take the kids to this, or, any kind of planning out, or do you guys just show up and whatever happens?
It's a little bit of both. So in the case of over the last almost now 2 years with Adam and Laurel down in Alabama, especially in this last year, they wound up doing a 1 year, what we call professional military education program. And then they were selected for a very highly selective second year program in which they were getting a master's degree, reading, no kidding, a book a day, writing papers once a month. And so when they had to go into this paper writing week, either Judy and I or Laurel's mom and dad, who are Dave and Lynette, who live in Iowa, the grandparents would deploy in for anywhere from a 7 to 8 to 9 day time period to help out with the kids. Now they're going to school or pre-K and daycare, but you're still there to help get food ready. And so that in that case, there might be activities planned in that week. Like we were in Alabama just about a month ago, and there was soccer practice one night. There's gymnastics another night. There's a soccer game going on here. There's a birthday party, those standard things that happen with children of those ages. And we're helping out where we can. Of course, Nonna she's a beast in the kitchen. She is phenomenal. She loves cooking. So she plans out, and all the granddaughters know it. I mean, not the granddaughters, all the daughter-in-laws know it. They love it. And they go, Nonna, you're here. Over to you. I am deferring to the professional expert.
Right.
And granddad, you just stay out of the way. You go to the grocery store, you get, do that stuff. And so there are some activities. And then at times there, maybe when we're getting together, there isn't. But then another thing that we've done over the last couple of years, and Ellie and Cece are the ones who primarily have had the opportunity to do it, although we did have Cohen and Adeline here 1 year. And this year we're hoping to have more, is coming to our house for a week or so here in Pennsylvania. And they wind up calling it Camp Nonna. It's not Camp Nonna and Granddad. It's Camp Nonna because, the grandmother obviously comes first, and Camp Nonna sounds so much cooler than Camp Granddad, and they'll go, oh, Camp Nonna and Granddad too, but I get it. I know my role. I know my position.
Right.
And in fact, Liz was talking about Camp Nonna one time, telling Ellie something about it. Yeah, we're going to do Camp Nonna. And somebody overheard and says, you got to tell me about this Camp Nonna. How can I get my daughter in Camp Nonna? And she's like, it's my mother-in-law. But so again, some things planned, some things not planned. And when they come for Camp Nonna, we have activities planned, from arts and crafts to doing stuff around outside in the summer. Just again, when Remy was here in February, and Ralph and Nina are working, we had activities planned with her pretty much almost every day. Again, and she's got an amazing imagination, and loves to play, various things. And of course, princesses and Elsa and Anna, and of course, all the things that girls her age are into. But she also likes doing crafty stuff. So, and then we would take her to, I think it might have been Hobby Lobby, one of those craft stores, and we're buying stuff for her that then we can come home and do paintings and gluings and those kind of things. So yeah, it's a little bit of both. And when we wind up going to the beach house, or the house near the beach there, near Ocean Isle Beach in Charlotte, North Carolina, there it's pretty much free form. What's the weather? When are we going to go to the beach? That kind of stuff. And then there's a pool in the neighborhood. So but that's a typical summer type activity.
Right. That's go get your toes in the sand and play in the warm water, and
right.
Take the day as it comes.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. With all these different activities and the interactions, have you developed any, let's say, certain activities that are granddad activities? And some people have traditions like, after a play date, we're always going to Baskin Robbins and we get a scoop of ice cream, or,
Right.
this is something that we do with Granddad. Do you have anything like that?
Yeah, we do. Not necessarily precisely with each one individually, but there are certain things. So, for example, this is now over a year and a half ago, we were going down to North Carolina to be with Ellie and Cece and Brian and Liz there. They're just west of Raleigh and Apex. They had just bought a new house, moved in. The girls had decided that Granddad was going to build them a playhouse outside. I'm like, okay. They're like, Granddad, you built a bar in your house. You can build us a playhouse. I'm like, okay.
Yep.
So I find a plan online, and through my son and our connections with F3 guys, he winds up securing me all the tools that I need. And so over, of course, as with any project, there are cost overruns, extended delays, But the girls, every time when they would come home from school, they would help me for a little bit, which was kind of fun. And they would give me ideas that they had on how they wanted to enhance the playhouse. When we go to the beach, and we're there at the beach with them, or they love me, they'll lay on a boogie board and I'll just pull them through the water. When we're in the pool, they love to see me do stupid stuff in the pool, can openers, cannonballs, just be a fun granddad, just kind of doing things like that. When we go down to Alabama with Cohen, he loves building Legos, and we'll sit there for hours with the Legos. They're in a big pile, so the pirate set, the spaceship is no longer the pirate set of the space. It's all mixed up. Right. And we're making different things that one day this stuff might all look like space vehicles. One day they might all look like cars, and trucks. Adeline recently has gotten into, she loves playing horsey with me, where, I get on my hands and knees and she climbs on my back and she tells me where to go around the house. Jameson at 2 years old, you can pretty much do anything with him. And he, of course, loves being swung around and that kind of thing. And Remy, in her case, it's not necessarily one specific thing, but it's just being part of it with my wife, with Nonna. She tends to gravitate, as most girls do, closer to her. And then to be just part of that, to be sitting there with her, whatever the situation may be. Back at Christmas when Adam and Laurel and his family were here, and Adeline had gotten these 6 princess dolls for Christmas. Well, we sat there one day for about an hour, and I had to be the different princess dolls while she was the other one. We had to have this conversation. And you just sort of figured it out as we went along.
So, one of the things that's interesting too is as we get older and we start to move from being that parent to the grandparent, I can remember in my 20s and 30s with my kids, there were certain things where definitely felt self-conscious kind of with the kids play. Not that I wouldn't do it, but there was a little bit of like, man, if my buddy saw me doing this, I'd end up with no end of grief from these guys. But then I find now with a 3-year-old myself that like I don't care anymore. And wondering if you've got any of that kind of filter, like, oh man, with everything that I've done in my background, if the guys saw me doing this, no sense of, no end of the teasing, but at the same time, they would love it. And then I'm a grandpa. I don't care.
And I agree with you 100%. It's a great opportunity at a grandpa, grandfather, granddad age to be a kid again and do the things that kids love to do. And so I don't worry about that. And you're right. Some of my friends could give me a hard time about it, especially some of my fighter pilot friends, but they're all grandfathers now too. So,
yep.
They're doing the same thing. But I think also with that comes from others who see it, and the fact that you're doing this and to have fun, to connect with them, a certain respect that, hey, here's somebody who's of that grandfatherly age, who's willing to connect with his grandchildren or her, those grandchildren at their level, because that's what you have to do. Yeah, you want to be able to teach them certain things and stuff, but you've got to connect at their level so it can be fun, and they remember those things, and how you connect with them. I remember one time with my granddaughters out in the backyard, they're out playing like in the sprinkler, and like a little step-in pool. And I just walked over and fell in, and they just got the biggest kick out of it, and it's just like, and then my daughter-in-law's like, "Granddad," she gets a kick out of it and stuff. And it was to be able to connect with them, to show, hey, we're gonna have fun when we can.
No, absolutely. Well, it's important too to remember, and I've learned this through other interviews that I've had, that connecting with them at their levels when they're younger establishes that bond that lasts through those teenage years and onwards, right? So if you don't have that early connection with them, it becomes tougher as Ellie gets to be 15, and there's things that come up in her life that she needs granddad's, wisdom and input on. And if you don't have that connection early on in their lives, they're not likely to bring you, important decisions that 15-year-olds have to make, as an example.
Yeah, I agree. And when I look back at how my dad and my father-in-law, my wife's dad, how both of them did that in their own different ways. They were completely two different people.
Right.
How they did that with our three sons and connected with them when they were younger, that then as they were a little bit older, before unfortunately they passed away, that they were able to still have those connections. And like you said, be able to, there might have been times when they went to them with things that they didn't want to talk to us about. I don't know. And if they did, that's awesome. And I think they probably did, or, ways in which both those men set examples to our three sons that are still in place today, that all three of them carry with them in their heart and in their mind, that they'll never forget. And so those are some of the same things, but, and in my case, they were connected male to male, in our case with the six blood grandchildren, 4 are girls. And so that's a different connection. And then, like I mentioned to you, knowing that, they are initially drawn closer to Nonna, but yet I can still have a relationship with them, with each one of them in a special way, and which makes it that much more important, I think, to find that right connection, to be able to have that trust, like you said, when they're younger, and to build upon that trust so that then as they get to older ages, that if need be, you can have that serious conversation about something.
Absolutely. And I can tell you too, that interviewing women about their relationships with their grandfathers, that even though those relationships are different than the relationships between grandfathers and grandsons, it's no less important. And there's not one that's better than the other or anything like that. They can tend to be different. And I can tell you, the women that I've interviewed so far always talk about the example that they got from just watching grandpa, and how grandpa treats grandma, and how that had carried over into their dating relationships. And so, it's very interesting to remember that grandsons, granddaughters are always watching. They're always looking to see if you're walking the walk and if you're talking the talk, and then how much that impacts them. That they're not going to tell you that, but it does have an impact on them as they get older.
It certainly does. And even like in the relationships that we have had with ours and continue to have, that's separated some by distance, they're still, like you said, they're watching and observing, whether it's on a FaceTime call with the entire family, or they're sitting in the background while I'm having a conversation with our son, one of our sons, about something. They're listening, they're hearing, they're paying attention, of course, when we're all together. And that's a very great point about the relationship that Judy and I have as husband and wife. And then how does that translate to father and mother, to our sons, and father-in-law and mother-in-law to our daughter-in-laws? And then how does that translate into granddad and Nonna to our grandchildren is extremely important. Because I think we're always trying to set, and should be trying to set, the proper example. We're not perfect, Right. I've made mistakes, and we'll still make mistakes, but recognizing those and making those fewer and fewer is, of course, what one of the things we're striving to do to accelerate our lives.
Absolutely. Now, are there any, let's say, family traditions or family traditions that you're starting or mindful of wanting to pass down? Things that maybe your dad did, things that you saw him as a grandfather do that you're now looking to pass on to your grandchildren?
Yes. So, one of the things that has come into play for all of them is they expect every Friday night to be pizza night. Simple, but it started with Judy and I don't know, 20 years ago, and she makes her own pizza. So almost all of them now, almost every Friday night is pizza night. And if we're in town, if we're together with them, they know Nonna's making pizza because she makes her own crust, and stuff. And so that it seems small, but it's very it's a significant thing that they recognize has become a family tradition that has started with us. We center a lot of things around food. It's just the way we are. And my father's side of the family and Judy's father's side of the family are Italian. So the Italians, we kind of like our food. So like our Christmas dinner that if it's at our house is a traditional meal that we have with braciole and lasagna and the Christmas Eve antipasto and things like that. And so when we're at the beach, we have certain traditions that we try to do there, and just again how we're being together and stuff. But so those are primary, I think, and they see those things, the importance of recognizing significant events when they come up, whether it's birthdays, anniversaries, and that kind of thing.
Sure. Now, Brian had talked about, when I had interviewed him, the importance that he had with this kitchen table at the beach house in North Carolina. And I think how I think it was your father would sit at that table with the grandkids around and visit and kind of talk over things going on in their lives. And he was suggesting that I think maybe you're doing somewhat of the same thing when the kids are at the beach house.
We do. When we're there or anywhere that we're all together, the kitchen table has been an important aspect of our lives. And I guess I hadn't really thought of it as a tradition, but it really has been. And it grew from my parents. That time to spend around the table, take that deep breath. Don't be, looking at phones and doing other stuff. Don't be sitting in front of the TV. Sit around the table, have the meal. It can be the simplest meal that there is, but then have conversation that's meaningful conversation. It doesn't have to be a life lesson every time, but just to have that talk. And so when we're with all of our sons and our grandchildren, no matter where we're at, that time around that kitchen table is very important. Yeah, there might be stories told, and at our house there in Charlotte, that kitchen table was supposed to be a pair of sneakers for me when I was probably, 8 or 9 years old, that my mom had her eye on for years, which my grandfather wound up, I think he bought the table and chairs and the hutch to go along with it, an Ethan Allen set. And so there's been a lot of family history around that table. There's been a lot of laughing. There's definitely been some crying. around it, both good and hurtful. Well, I don't mean hurtful, but I mean good and, sad things or stuff when, I screwed up as a teenager, and that's where I heard it from my more than likely my dad, but my mom too, and those life lessons. So we, as a family overall, still try to do that whenever we can. Even though, as I mentioned earlier on in our conversation, we were last in Alabama, and Judy and I picked the Cohen and Adeline up from school. We take them to gymnastics. They go to gymnastics. We get home, but Judy's got dinner already staged, ready to roll. Everybody gets in, gets cleaned up, sat down at the table, and have that. With younger kids, it might only last 15 minutes, but it's time around the table, right? You get to when they're a little bit older, like in Ellie's case, and stuff. Well, then you're spending 30 minutes or so around the table, and that is, as you said, I think extremely important, and I think our family has recognized that and has made it part of their lives, which again, we got from our families.
No, I definitely agree. There's something about that, whether it's a kitchen table or, when they're older, a campfire, sitting around, and I always like to say you talk about everything and you talk about nothing, at the same time. So Ralph, as we start to wrap this conversation up, what advice would you have for a new grandfather, somebody that's either, just finding out that they're going to be a grandfather, or somebody that's maybe they've got a year or two old grandson or granddaughter?
My advice is, one, continue to be yourself, but find the appropriate ways that you're going to want to connect with that grandchild. Now, when they're 1 month, 2 months, 6 months old, that's hard to do, but hold them, read them a story, talk to them, do those kind of things, and then find ways that you can connect with them, not with what you want to do, but with something that they want to do. Now, you might have something that you want to try to teach them to do, and you want for them to try to appreciate, and it can be maybe your enthusiasm for the outdoors. Maybe you're a gardener. I'm a bit of an audiophile, so an appreciation for listening to high quality music, your work background, that, in life experiences. So that would be my advice. And if something doesn't work at first, well, try something else, and recognize that you're going to have those opportunities to connect, but don't force it. Sort of let them come to you with things that they want to be able to do, or you see them. You're a grandpa, and your granddaughter is 1.5 years, and she's sitting down, playing with a tea set. Go have some tea. There's nothing wrong with that, right? Or they got Barbies galore, go play a little Barbie. And then with your grandson, go build those Legos, go show them how to skip a stone across a lake. Show your granddaughter how to skip a stone across a lake. There's nothing wrong with that, right? Teach them how to shoot a bow and arrow. Brian can tell you about my dad teaching him how to shoot a pellet gun out in the backyard. He even taught him how to play poker. When they were appropriate age.
Right.
So that's would be my advice, and don't try to be the parent. That's not your job. Now, that doesn't mean you can't discipline in an appropriate manner. But let the parent be the parent. You can be the grandparent. You can still obviously set those examples, still hold the standards. There can be times, as they hit the terrible twos or the trying threes, or, the fearsome foursomes, where they're trying to figure out in their minds who they are, and they might push you, and push your limits. And if they push your buttons, hold your temper, but also make that correction that this is not right. This is not how we treat somebody if, in fact, there's something like that happens. So that would be my advice. And then as they grow, adapt with them as they grow, and find those things that are of a common interest. But let them know your passions too, because like our granddaughter Ellie, and I don't know if it's because of me, my background. She's interested in space, and she's interested in being an astronaut. I mean, that was my initial goal, and that never happened. But I had a very successful Air Force career, I think, and got to fly. So you never know what example you set for them, which can lead them in a certain direction that sets them on a great path for their entire lives.
Oh, that's great advice. Now, Ralph, is there anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to talk about before we end this?
Maybe the only thing is, like when each one of them, our sons and daughter-in-laws, were expecting, they're like, so, what do you want to be called? And some just let the grandkids figure it out. And I had said, well, granddad, but, because that's what I called my grandparent, both my granddads, and my dad was called granddad. Judy's dad was primarily Pop. But that was it. And so, but if they come up with something else in between, great. Like our granddaughter Cece, when she was first learning how to talk, she couldn't get the sounds out. So I was for about 3 or 4 months. And now today she busts my chops all the time, calling me Grandy, but it's a running joke between the two of us.
Sure.
And things. And so, those just, and some have pre-planned, some just let it happen and things like that. So, but those are, and if they come up with something, a nickname for you and it's not offensive, roll with it, let it go and have fun with it.
Sure.
So,
well, Ralph, I sure do appreciate you taking time to talk with me and be on the Cool Grandpa podcast. And just wanted to say thanks again for having some time to sit down with us and share a little bit of your wisdom and your experience with being a grandfather.
Thanks, Greg. I appreciate the time with you, and I hope that it's helpful for the podpacksters that are out there listening, and they can apply some of this. And, I'm a firm believer that we never stop learning in life, and I'm always looking to learn too. So I look forward to listening to more of your podcasts and picking up some cool tips from other cool grandpas.
Thanks. Wow, what a great conversation with Ralph. I really enjoyed learning how he was able to deal with the news of what was going on with Ellie, his first grandchild, and how she was coming into the world early and premature, and then he still had command of the NATO air forces and was fulfilling his obligations with Libya at the same time that his granddaughter is being born. His son's going through the first child that's coming out premature, and being able to understand that sometimes things are out of whack, as he said. And then what we try to do is get them back into whack. And it was really interesting to hear that conversation. The other part that stuck out with me is the importance of being able to have a space where people can come together. You can talk about what's important in your life, what you have coming up, what are some of the lessons learned, and in the case of Ralph and the Jodice family, that's the kitchen table is often that place. It's a place where everybody laughs and they learn and they cry together and they have hard conversations, but it's a place of safety, and it's a place of where family is really that family unit where everybody's in it together. And, so it just made me realize and made sure that it brought to my mind to make sure that when my grandkids are starting to get a little bit older, that we've got those conversations around the kitchen table or wherever it might be, but that they know that there's a place where they've got grandpa's full attention, and they're going to get a little wisdom, maybe a little joking, and maybe having some hard conversations. What I want you guys to do is go to the website, check out the show notes, because again, you'll find Ralph's Air Force biography listed there. You'll find a link to the conversation that Brian and I had previously. And then I want you guys to leave me a comment. What was your big takeaway from this conversation with Ralph? So until we talk again, remember to be cool. Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.